Connie, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, let's see. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're so glad that you're here and joining us today. This is a webinar that I asked Connie to help me with. I had some other trainings that I had to do, but we decided, obviously, because of COVID-19, we turned everything into webinars. So I reached out to Connie Burke and she was so willing to help me. So we're so excited that you're here. Thank you for joining us. Our goal today is to really get to connect with you guys and answer some of your questions and go over some things about supporting supervisors during this sort of time that we've never ever experienced before. So we're excited to talk with you and spend time with you and see what's on your mind. As you see, we have interpreters today with us. So we're gonna always be kind to Anne and Teresa who are here with us. And I'm gonna try to speak slowly and clearly, and Connie will too, so that we can support our interpreters and those who are watching as well. We wanna know that obviously this is a really tough time for us here in Washington since we were the epicenter of the COVID-19. We have been a little ahead of the game and a little ahead of the curve what's going on in our country. So kudos to Washington State and our wonderful ways of keeping social distancing. I know it's hard because I think here in Washington, even though people say, you know, there's that, what do they call it, Connie, the Seattle freeze or something like that? I say we are wonderful, amazing people here in Washington, and we love to chit chat and talk and do things out in nature. And this is really hard for us not to be able to go outside. So we want to thank all of you for being inside today and being with us on this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll try to get to those. I'm going to be looking at those, and Mackenzie, who's also on our call, will help us with that. She's our tech person today. So if you have questions, put those in the chat box as well. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started and let's get it rolling. Again, I'm Deidre Boylan. I work at the Washington State Coalition. I've been there for a little over 5 years. And I always like to say prior to that, I was at New Beginnings for about 25 years, running our shelter program and our community program, which was such a delight. I love folks, I love people, and I think this is my calling for the rest of my life. So, you know, this is what you'll be seeing my face for a very long time. Let's just put it that way. And then Connie, I'll have you introduce yourself, and thank you so much for being a part of this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dee, for reaching out. And hello, good morning to everyone out there in Washington State. My name is Connie Burke, and I am currently the executive director of a congregation called the Shaman in West Seattle. And we have a project called Kadash, which is a anti-violence project. But you probably know me most from being the executive director of the Northwest Network for many years. And Dee reached out and said, hey, you want to talk with folks about supports and how we can support staff and support each other in supervision and management in this time of huge transition. And, you know, much of this will be a temporary reality, but some things we'll probably pull from this will be with us for a while. So I was glad to be able to be here and happy to see everybody. So.
Yay! Connie, me, this is how you can reach us. You know where I'm at, and if you don't get to write down Connie's information, just contact me and I'll get it to you. All right, Connie, the balancing act.
You know, to your point about Seattle freeze, Deirdre, humans, we are actually social animals. So whether or not you're introverted or extroverted, or you feel that you're a misanthrope, or whatever those things that we tell ourselves about why we're happy to not, you know, to not be with other people. In fact, in our neurobiology and the biology of our human bodies, being with other people is part of what helps us feel well and regulated and makes our neurobiology work. So in a very fundamental level, this shift to being, for some people by themselves, just alone in their homes or only with a few people, has a profound impact on the way even our bodies work, our minds work. So it, saddle freeze notwithstanding, or in being an introvert notwithstanding, this is a big deal for everybody. So I want to appreciate that. And when we were talking about kind of what was coming up for folks who are directing programs, supporting other staff, looking at how to make choices in terms of service provision, in terms of outreach, in terms of how they were standing up services in this new reality, in this online world, we're talking about that balancing act as supervisors between our commitment to survivors and our commitment to our staff. And that, that there is, I think, in my own work, understanding myself as being part of a movement, I tend to minimize the tension between supporting survivors and supporting staff, because I'm like, as a survivor myself, as a person who worked in the movement, how, there can be a desire to kind of minimize that tension. But I think about Nan Stoops' teaching she did some years back at a Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence conference, where she talked about dynamic tension, that the only reason we're able to move our arm is the dynamic tension in our muscles that can pull oppositely, and do that in a constructive, in a cooperative way that allows us to move. So without minimizing that tension, recognizing that tension, but understanding that the goal for both of that is the same, that we want to support survivors under difficult, new, challenging, and changing conditions. And we want to support our staff under difficult, new, challenging, and changing conditions. And we recognize there's a lot of harmony in that. There doesn't have to be conflict necessarily, but there will be tensions. There will be natural, even dynamic, productive tensions that we have to navigate. And when there's tension, it's time to bring in balance, to try to figure out how we balance those things.
Yeah.
And so for me, if people have been to anything I've done in the last few years, you've probably heard me talk about this Full Frame initiative, framework for well-being. And Full Frame is a documentary term for when you look at sort of the whole context that a subject in a documentary is in. So not just their personal life, but like, what's the economy of where they live, or what's the environment like there, where do they come from? And so in this idea about often when we're having to do siloed services, like only look at safety, or only look at housing, or only look at some other piece, that we can lose the dynamic tension between those things, and that every human is working to minimize trade-offs, so to have the most of social connectedness, stability, safety, efficacy, and meaningful access to resources. Every human needs those different components in order to function, and that all the time there are trade-offs that are exacted from us around those things. So if you take a job that's another 10-minute commute, that basically costs you one relationship, because that's another, 50 minutes a day, at 50, that would be 100 minutes a week in that commute time that you might dedicate to a friendship or something. So really looking at that all the time we're having to make trade-offs among these elements of well-being, but that the more vulnerable we are, or the more structural determinants for health or well-being or economic success or economic deprivation that we're facing because of racism, because of sexism, because of economic structures, the more extreme those trade-offs are, and the harder it is to make those, the more trade-offs are exacted from us. So the model tells us that we should be looking at people's whole lives when we're making safety plans or other kinds of, strategies with folks, that we need to not just look at safety, but also social connectedness, that a person might not want to live in a certain neighborhood because they would always be followed when they went into the grocery store or what have you. So, But I've just been thinking about this in terms of our present moment and how much pressure is being put on every one of these elements of well-being. And that when that happens, when the pressure is so extreme, people are losing income, both the folks that we're supporting and our own staff. They have members of their family that have been laid off or have uncertain job prospects. The social connectedness, not just with our extended family and friends, but congregations aren't able to meet. People aren't being able to go to their regular doctor appointments. All the kinds of, bridge clubs not happening. All the baseball's canceled. This was the first year that my kid, Judy Kids, and JoJo Kid was all on the same team. We were so excited. Boom, gone. One of my eldest son, about 85% of his life is sports. He plays sports, he watches sports, he listens to sports podcasts, he critiques sports, he looks at economy through sports, he looks at politics through sports, and all of that is just boom. It's taken away. So you have all these pressures on people's normal course of life, but also on trade-offs in their own sense of well-being, where their skill sets are, where their efficacy is. And as organizations, we're experiencing that same kind of pressure, where our the tools and the skills that we have in our muscle memory, that we can do tired, we can do happy, we can do all of that muscle memory is just taken away from us, and we're in a new terrain every second. We're laying down new neural pathways, trying to figure out where is that zoom button. And here you are, a person that's completely competent on your computer. You can zip around, and now you just look like an idiot that can't find the button, and you're not that person. And then it makes, and you're doing that in full view of everybody watching you peck away. And it's all of that puts pressures on our neurobiology, on our sense of our competence and ability to function, and in just our heart and our mind. It's just a way that we're carrying. So when we're looking at that balancing act, I'm thinking about these elements of well-being for us individually, and then also as organizations. Many people had to cancel fundraisers or trying to take them onto other formats, or are fundraising from folks who are uncertain about their own financial picture. And so it's unclear what they may be able to contribute at this time. So that's kind of the backdrop that we're functioning within. Do you want to say anything about that, Dee? Or?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, I was going to chime in, and you said everything that I was going to say. And for me, it's just like your brain has to think in a different way. And how often are you saying to yourself, now I got to think different. I got to change the way I was thinking. I got to change the way I was moving about in my community and in the world. And you don't know whether you should think quickly or slow it down, right? So I just think it is challenging the way that we think, and that when we're challenged with our thinking, you start to question your own ability to do things. And that's, I think, where it gets really difficult, because then when we start questioning ourselves and questioning what we were doing every day in the norm that was actually successful, it just becomes hard. And then I think that's why it's so important for us to come together, so that we can talk with one another to make sure that check and balance is there. Like, hey, I'm feeling this way. Is that accurate? What should I do with that? And I know that us communicating really helps us sift some of that out, so that we can feel better about all the work that we're doing each day.
Yeah. And there's this weird kind of cultural wrinkle where all of a sudden there's all these news stories about domestic violence coming across the news feeds, people talking about, that the work that our movement has done, that Washington State has done, that the coalition has done, but also individual programs of building up awareness and understanding of this, of domestic violence, and that, our homes are only safe places when we're supported to live safely there, that there's nothing just default. There's not a romantic idea about inside a home that just automatically makes you safe under racism, patriarchy, unchecked capitalism, the whole jam. And so just then to see that kind of blowing up all over the news and things at a time when we're the least, when we're in this totally new moment and our strategies for building power from that is in a little bit of an uproar. That's just an extra wrinkle that I think I can imagine people are thinking about, so.
Yes, yes. So here we have the new temporary normal. COVID-19 has temporarily changed the entire world. Working from home is new for most staff, and most work from home. So okay, this is great, Connie, because I just want to point out that I knew that people were gonna be able to see me today. And I have a tendency to work from my bedroom because that's where the modem is, and that's where I get the most juice for my network, right? But I really didn't want people to see my bed, right? Because all these 100 folks in my bedroom, right? So I put a fake picture on the wall. I have a fake plant next to me. I did some staging, have a little fun with it. But normally, I don't live this way. But it was fun. It's funny. And it's like being creative in the world that we're in now, to just have a little fun and a little, gist in there. But I'm working differently, but I'm making it work, and I'm making sure that I'm feeling comfortable at the same time and having fun with it. So, we're all working from home. A lot of us are. And that's the new normal. Like, how long is that going to last? What is that going to look like for us? And how do we adjust? And guess what? If it switches all back again, that's a new adjustment. We all have to start that process again as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, staff are slowly adapting to this temporary normal. I think, sometimes did you ever watch that show, The Walking Dead?
A little bit.
So, it's kind of like that. We're kind of walking around going, what do we do now? What do we do now? And I think from what I've heard, that managers are really struggling to figure out, how do I transition this advocacy thing into people who are working from home now? What does that look like? How do we make that work? And, it's all new. We're all trying to figure it out now. How do we make sure that advocates aren't giving out their own cell phone numbers to people where it might not be safe? So it's just something to think about. Well, we can talk more about that, but it's the new thing that we're trying to do. Staff are likely to feel overwhelmed and will need to be patient, support managers more than ever right now, because we're hovering, trying to figure it all out, and we're trying to get acclimated. And the best thing is to know all that you can about COVID-19 so that you can keep yourself safe, your staff safe, your participants safe, your family safe, because I think that's really important for us.
And saying managers' time to shine here is, I mean it. For programs that have a management as opposed to just a director and staff, but also has a level of management, that's really the tactical level of changes that people are talking about. Our philosophy hasn't changed. Our strategic goals haven't changed to support survivors and to end domestic violence. What has changed is the entire tactical landscape. How are you going to do that from, advocate with survivor? How are you going to get people to a safe place? And that is really where managers are the person who has the field of vision of what's happening, and is able to help direct resources. This is all the logistical things they're talking about on a national level, is how do you get the respirators where people need them? There's a similar kind of thing. If you have resources with your organization, and managers really have often the most information about where it needs to be and how to get it there. So for organizations that do have managers, the network didn't always have managers. There was a time, before that. And as a director, I was never a great manager. My focus was more on getting resources to people, removing barriers, and looking at the, out ahead this way, and when we started building in managers into our programs, you could really see the value of somebody who is oriented back towards staff and supporting them to be able to take those resources and implement. So it's not, I'm not saying managers' time to shine as it really is a time for directors to recognize the value of that managers' work, for managers to get a little love for that, and also connect back with everybody. So
Yeah. And I just noticed that Judy had wrote, the rest of the world is experiencing the uncertainty and loss of control that survivors experience every day. Trauma.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many things, so many parallels I think we could, you know, pull between like the messaging and the kind of tension that people are facing. And meanwhile, survivors are still trying to make it. So yeah, so the tech is such a huge barrier. And, you know, I have one of my millions of I have 3 mother-in-laws. They're all wonderful and lovely people who I adore. The 2 of them live on lesbian land in southern Missouri. And I can tell you the internet access is not great there. So, you know, when you're in a rural context and you're trying to log in and do this work, it can be, you know, even more challenging. But even in our neighborhood in Seattle, can be spotty internet for people. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, one thing I learned is that like we all shifted very quickly to work from home. And that was an adjustment. That takes time. You gotta set everything up. And like I said, I'm working from my bedroom. I've moved around from room to room, but that also creates a lot of stress. Like, you know, but it's manageable stress, but it's really stressful. And then talking with other programs to find out how they're doing it. You know, everyone doesn't have the best internet service, and everyone doesn't have all the capabilities to do Zoom chat. So it's really trying to bring folks up to speed to be able to have some of these things that they can do from home.
Yeah.
I think.
So one thing people are talking about, you know, the tech issues that they have, and then the tech issues of setting people up remotely, that suddenly there's all this tech expertise that we need, that there's conversations about, you know, entire meetings that could have been a phone call or an email. Probably there's vice versa, emails that should have been a phone call. And then there's a lot of things about when to start and stop your work. And I do think this will be interesting in terms of the world that we have on the other side of this, is that, you know, when we're dealing with traumatic content, do we want to be bringing, what's the impact of bringing traumatic content into our home 24 hours a day in our work? When I started out as an advocate, in a little program in Kansas, we forwarded the hotline to our homes at night for overnight shifts. And so, you know, traumatic calls would just come into your house. I'm sure there are people that, you know, that may still happen in some places. And it has a different impact to be processing that trauma in your home versus processing that trauma someplace that you can, you know, that you're set up to kind of hold that and then to move back into your personal space.
Mm-hmm.
So
one of the great response someone wrote was, all the meetings that could have been emails. Which I think is so funny, because we often say that. And, you know, someone mentioned the other day, like, if you were told that you couldn't work from home, but now you are. Yeah. It's just the new way of the way things are working out. But yes. Do you want me to go to the next slide, Connie?
Yeah, I was going to say that in this slide here, one of the biggest, I think, things that I'm practicing or trying to remind myself is how much of this is actually physical task. We think of it as an intellectual task, or perhaps an emotional task, like dealing with the sadness or dealing with all the changes as intellectual or emotional work, which they are, but they're also physical. It's physically taxing. So when people are talking about it's tiring to be at the computer, there's the physical task of our internal sensations of
Mm-hmm.
tolerating the grief, tolerating being present with other people, tolerating the frustration when the meeting starts 15 times because people are coming on or logging off or whatever. And so tolerating setting boundaries right? So people may be in a different kind of crisis, or people that the staff you're supporting may have a different tolerance for risk personally,
Mm-hmm.
or different orientation towards what is, you know, whether they feel they can go outside or any of those things. And that setting boundaries with people is a physical task. You have to tolerate the sensation inside yourself of however that manifests for you. For some people, that manifests as a kind of feeling of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Their stomach clenches up, and for some people, it feels angry. It feels mad that somebody's putting you in a position to have to set this limit. Whatever those things are that as managers and supervisors, people are dealing with all the time, but it's in less extreme situations. And so you have more resiliency to metabolize that and handle it. Those sensations are going to be coming to the forefront. And so recognizing and working to build up the physical tolerance, and to recognize that that's going to be more exhausting. You are going to be more tired. And so thinking about how to get yourself the recharging that you need, whether if you're an extrovert, that might be some way to interact with other people virtually in a fun way. If you're an introvert, all this being on the computer with people looking at you all the time might feel very exhausting, and you need to find a book that you can kind of escape into to recharge, whatever those things are for you. And so that is, and then also as advocates, coming from an advocacy tradition, as many of us have, we want to fix things. An advocate instinct is, you don't let anyone suffer alone. You don't let anybody walk that road alone. You are with them. You are in there. You're jumping to the fore. You're researching the thing. You're finding the thing. You're swimming. And so that idea of taking a pause and reflecting and waiting to get more information, to not have the feeling that you're failing if you don't know at this moment, but to be able to recognize, like, we don't know. We are in a time where we don't know how long this is going to be. We don't know how all these strategies are going to shake out. And that we can wait. Here we say wait before emailing or texting back, but there's certain things where we have to do something immediately. Like we had to transition to being at home. It was like, here we didn't 48 hours later, the stay-at-home order was going to be in place, and that was it, right? So, which as Judy said, that's very much like survivor's experience, where you have to make a quick choice to get to a safer place, and then you have to figure out, what are you going to do? Here you are. Now what are you going to do? And at that point, we don't want to make 1,000 quick moves in 1 minute, right? We want to wait, gather our information, and then move ahead. So yeah, you can change them.
Right. Okay. I just want to point out too that I think it's so important. I've been trying to talk to folks about like language to use. You got to practice. Makes almost perfect. I won't say perfect, but one of the things that I've really learned is to say things like, when people come to me and ask me questions, and I feel like you said, like, I have to have an answer, I have to have a response, because that's what we do. We figure it out immediately. And I realize that I have to create a response that says, well, that's a great question. Can I get back to you? Wow, you've really been thinking about this. Can you give me some time? And I will get back to you and see if I can find an answer for you. So a lot of times we want to solve things really quickly, but I think we have to take a step back from when someone asks us a question, or when someone wants us to do something that we really should take some time to think about. We should take a step back and consider everything that's going to happen if we say yes immediately, or if we just take a pause. I always say, press the pause button, because pressing the pause button gives you time. And I think there's a question in here that I wanted to ask you, Connie, because someone wanted to know, like, how do you know when to stop and start your day? You've got kids, you've got the dog, you've got the phones and the emails, and folks are just having a hard time balancing it all so that it's not bleeding too far into the morning and too far into the evening, and you feel like you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How do you set a routine?
Well, I could probably talk about how one might do that. I could talk about how I would do that, but a person might. No, I mean, I think the easiest / hardest way to do that is to protect your morning. to figure out what time do you have to go on at, and then back it up from there. And so if you have to start at 8:30, or you have to start at 8, or you have to start at 9, that's when the requests are going to be coming from your staff that really require your attention. Backing it up from there and taking some time to get up and have your own thoughts and your own, whatever practice works for you. Of, I look forward to my cup of coffee so much in the morning. Or, I have a friend that has journaled every morning of her life for like, I don't know, 40 years, like, just different ways that people have to get themselves centered. If you can protect that morning, not roll out of bed and start scrolling away on your phone, not turn on, God forbid, CNN to listen to the same story you heard last night, the same footage, right? Don't right. Just to protect some time in the morning to just come to yourself. And then if you have, if you practice a faith tradition or another practice like that, to really commit to, saying your morning Shema or doing whatever that ritual or practice is, that preserves some of your own kind of humanity, your own autonomy, your own personness inside of that, then to me, that gives you a foundation, that gives me a foundation to build out on and to be able to. I'm a work integrated person. There's folks who need work-life balance and people who are kind of work-life integrators. I've been a work-life integrator since I started working. When I'm working on something, I'm doing it all the time. I'm thinking about it all the time. If my art projects are about it, and so for me, what it looks like to pick up something and put down something is different than somebody who needs work-life balance, where they need to turn it off and have time where they're really not thinking about it at all. And so for me, that the healthiness comes from when I have some choice about it, right? So I'm always thinking about anti-violence work or some kind of organizing, or, like if I'm not doing this, I'm rabble rousing or I can show you a stack of posters that I Mod Podge for all my protests. But it's having the choice about it, right? So that I have some autonomy, some ability to choose what I'm focusing on. That's what gives me the sense of that it's not work.
Right.
And so, so that may be a thing that, people have to, it may be more integrated than it's ever been for you, but you might have to think about what is the choice I have about what I give my attention to right now, and to really notice and take time to say, I'm making this choice right now. I could choose to do something different, and I'm choosing to do this, to give you that sense of like, I am not an automaton. I'm not a robot of the movement. Right.
Well, someone wrote in the chat box, which I really liked it, and I just want to share it. It's from Paula Clark, and she indicated that she saw a quote that said, we're not all working from home right now. We're at home in a crisis trying to work. Yeah. So I really like that.
That's really different than making a plan. I'm sure many of you have looked at policies, work at home policies. They typically have an initial proposal, requirements about what kind of internet access a person maintains, what the space will be like. There's typically, if you're negotiating for a work at home situation with the employer, there's a trial period, you've set out goals, you see if those things are met. We didn't do any of that. We just had to stay home one day. And so that is exactly right. It's not, we didn't stand up a work from home arrangement to flex towards people's lives. We just had to stay home, but keep working.
Right.
And, and like, thank God for the opportunity to keep on serving survivors and the opportunity to keep on having a paycheck. It could be worse, as my people like to say. It could be better, but it could be worse. Like a thing I think that can be really intolerable to us is that we might not do it as well.
Right.
We might make more mistakes.
Right.
We may do it slower. And this is one thing that our field, I think we've tried to work on it the last few years in the work of increasing people's salaries before, some of the work that came out of our work with commerce and OCFA and everything. But our work, our movement relies so much on leveraging the efficiency of the workforce. So that managers and people that have been around for a while are doing the work of several people. And you know what I'm talking about, all you folks out there, write grants and do fundraising and do outreach and do direct service and do this, that there's a kind of efficiency, a multitasking, that we rely on in our field in order to produce all the work that we produce. Now, we're not alone in that. America has the most efficient workforce ever in the history of humankind, which that's a whole nother thing to talk about. But when our work has relied on that kind of efficiency, that kind of being on point, from morning till night, and that's how we produce at the rate we produce, when you just cannot be that efficient because you have 4 kids who are learning at home, and you have, all the things that you're doing, plus just in our neurobiology, we just cannot be that efficient. There is a toll and a taxing that comes. And if we try to work that efficiently, we'll make more mistakes, because if we're relying on those that muscle memory, those neural pathways just firing on their own, they're not going to the same place anymore. We cannot do it on autopilot. We have to be present. We should have always been present, but we have to be present right now, because there is no just muscle memory laid down. And so that means less efficient work, and we have to welcome that.
Right.
That could be an opportunity as our world to welcome that, as America to welcome that, as one of the things that maybe we could take forward, is this kind of level of efficiency is it requires a huge toll on our environment, on our family systems, on our social relationships. And so maybe it's time to lay some of that down.
So two things I want to point out. So we've still got a lot of slides to go through. So just tell me when you want me to go on to the next. We have we had a question for folks about, what is your biggest COVID success to date? And what reactions are you seeing amongst staff? So you guys can put that stuff in the chat. One of my things, that saying, Connie, that says, there's no shame in my game. Well, mine is, there's no shame in my mistake game.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to make mistakes, and I can't feel shameful about the mistakes that I'm going to make. I've got to, I got to keep moving. We all got to keep moving, and we're going to make mistakes. So there's no shame in making a mistake.
Yeah.
So we've got some questions.
Talking about that they're not working from home, that their staff are still at the program. And so that's another piece too, especially when you have maybe some of your staff are working from home now because, they're doing outreach or bookkeeping or whatever. And then you have some staff still, and the disparity and the impact of that. So the layers of this are just, we never get to everything in the hour and a half that we have to talk about them, but for sure the layers are intense.
Right. Just tell me when to keep going on.
Yeah. So, when we were saying, that asking about the impact, people feeling overwhelmed by the social stresses, that people are more overwhelmed by home and social stress than work stress. And so some of the impacts, and then also I noticed a note saying, people worked really hard to have people have a distinction between home and work life to protect for the trauma piece of that. And so what are some tips for kind of helping reserve that? So let's put a pin in that and come back to it. But yeah, some of the impacts that people are experiencing right now are these trauma exposure responses. So we're in a global traumatic moment, and the kinds of responses that you have when you experience trauma, we are seeing among all of us. And we wrote about this in Trauma Stewardship for folks who are, folks who are workers or support folks who are showing up for other people in their trauma, so secondary trauma or tertiary trauma exposure. But, as always, there's this blend between we're in our own kind of, wrenching moment as a world and a society, and then we're also, again, standing with survivors. And I would like to notice that this comes in a several year, when Kavanaugh was testifying, it seemed like that was like a global trauma, that it just keeps coming. And so, some of these impacts, feeling hopeless and helpless, the wolves are howling at the moon and they're saying, yeah, but are we making an impact? That's a little puppy barked in.
Yeah.
So this feeling of hopelessness or helplessness, that what can you do? And you can see behind me are my little mask making section. So I have to just find some thing that I can do, so I've been making masks. I say I'm off to the mask mines, like my body's like crumpled over from sewing masks all day for everybody I know. But that feeling of hopeless or helplessness, like how do you make an impact on this, we'll experience that. You can flip to the next one. And so one thing that is front of mind for me is remembering or just being mindful about what is in my individual control versus what's in our collective control. And so this is an important practice to do when we're up against that feeling of hopeless or helpless, because when we think about a global pandemic and what's in our individual control, if we think individually, I have to impact a global pandemic, that is a recipe for feeling quite helpless and quite hopeless, because there's very little, you can make all the masks in the world, and it doesn't take a Medium article to explain that doesn't have the correct kind of filtration to make up for the fact that we didn't prepare for a pandemic, right? So you can feel just in that individual sense, a total sense of hopelessness or helplessness, but we can remember in our collective control, there's certain work that's in our collective control that's about voting, that's about organizing, that's about policy work. And then we have our individual control. That's about staying home. That's about washing our hands. That's about being loving to our families, being loving to everyone we come in contact with, being kind to ourselves and others, so that we, giving those extra shout outs to our friends and family who are doing all this frontline work, including working in the anti-violence movement. So that when we hit that moment of feeling helpless and hopeless, one practice can be to stop, take some deep breaths and think, okay, what's in my individual control about this? And that might just be taking a breath. That might just be committing to be in the present moment and not just shutting down and denying what that person's telling you. And then we can remember, what's in my collective control? My collective control is to continue to work for strong policy that undermines these disparate health outcomes for people, right? So getting that clear can help us. You can turn the slide.
And if you guys aren't checking out the chat box, there's a lot of comments in the chat box just about what people are experiencing. So I really advise you to look in there and see what people are experiencing. There's so much. I can't read all of them, yeah, but there's really great comments about how people are experiencing what they're going through and some of the things that they're doing. And Judy put a link in there to Trauma Stewardship, some information that's inside the book. So make sure you check out that link. You can just cut and paste it and put it somewhere and save it for later. So.
And Libby just wrote on the chat, feeling like you can never do enough. That feeling of one can never do enough is one of these 16 impacts of trauma exposure. A sense that, that there's more to do and you just have to keep doing it 24/7. And, I think this is actually something that the anti-violence movement can bring to the world in this moment, is that we we understand what it's like to work in a situation that is desperately urgent in that moment and is chronic over a long period of time. And that we are moving back and forth between acting immediately and recognizing that, you know, we work with survivors whose kids are 2 and 3 and are going to be in daily, weekly relationship with abusive person that they've left and divorced until those kids are 20, right? And that we have to work with folks to think of strategies and tools for being in long-term relationship with somebody that does not love them and does not want the best for them, right? So we know what it's like to deal with that tension, and that we can't, you know, one of the things when we're feeling like we can't do enough right now is remembering our long game. If we are depleted to the point of exhaustion now, we're not going to have what we need for the next day and the next day. And so we have to have the discipline to lay it down, to set it down, and recognize when you're dealing with, you know, something of this magnitude, that we are, you know, it's not that heroism, I mean, people do act heroically. And I know that there are people on this, this webinar today who this is, you know, this much time to be taking aside to think in this, it's, you know, you haven't set aside this much time for anything because you've been working so hard to support everybody around you, which is one reason why I thought this is such a privilege to be able to talk with folks today. But that sense of never doing enough is very common experience when you're dealing with any kind of traumatic response, how
Right.
small or how big.
And Nature raised her hand, and I can't actually see what she did for that. But if you want to put something in the chat box, please feel free to do that. Again, challenging, right? I am trying to figure out all of these slides and figure out when to go, when not to go, read chat. It's really challenging. I might look great, but I'm telling you, it is a challenge. So putting information in the chat box works until I can find the actual thing that says raised hand.
Yeah, so, you know, hypervigilance, the sense of just being on all the time and that you don't want to miss anything. And, you know, what about, we're standing up programs that other, you know, we would have written full grants for, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this project. And now we're just doing it on a Tuesday, a Wednesday at 7:30, right? So it's hypervigilance. I bark at everything. Can't go wrong that way, says the dog. Yeah. Diminished creativity. All my energy just goes into getting through my days. I don't meditate anymore or write. That's what I used to do at night. I don't do anything anymore but work and go home and watch TV. And I'll tell you for myself, I can barely even watch TV right now. I can't even follow a narrative arc in a television show. And, you know, I'm an avid reader, and I've been finding it very hard to like read, to like get into the narrative flow and kind of lose myself in reading. And I've, you know, I don't know, I've lived through some stuff in my life. Reading was always my tool for that. So, you know, those are the kind of moments where like, wow, you know, there's something about this moment that you just have to give its props to, because we may find that some of our regular strategies for creativity or just getting away are not working. And so that's one thing we know as advocates. Again, we have so much to bring to this moment. What do we know about coping skills or survival skills? When somebody's in an emergency or an emergent situation, you do not take away their coping skills. You don't take away their coping strategies, their survival skills. You don't say, oh, you've just left an abusive partner, so we want you to start an exercise program and stop eating Fruit Loops or whatever. What you do is what we do is we offer more strategies. We lay more tools or coping skills on top of that. So, you know, when you're leaving your abuser, that's not a great time to stop smoking, but that might be a good time to like get some more healthy food that you get to eat. But you lay on top of your Fruit Loops, eat your Fruit Loops, and then eat something that's going to give you more staying power than that. So I would encourage people, this isn't a time to, you know, get too judgmental about whatever keeps you afloat. But if you can, bring in some tools that help you stay grounded, that's always good. So when it's really hard to embrace complexity when we're in a traumatic moment. So here's the person saying, what I'm proposing is this. No. So these are there's a lot of complex information out. And so we have, you all are dealing with complex situations of people, are still working. There are dangers associated with that. There's questions about how to support people to have clean and healthy environments. These are complex issues, and it's more difficult to embrace complexity. We want to break things down into fight, flight, freeze. That's
right.
what our old brain wants to be doing. To do that complexity, we need to be up in our prefrontal cortex. And the neurobiology of humans actually shuts down. It actually diminishes the blood flow to the front of your brain and puts in the back of your brain. So you just fight, flight, freeze. It doesn't want you thinking about all the nuances. And so you do have to regulate and calm down to get into into a brain space where you can even get to your prefrontal cortex and that more complex thinking.
Right.
Chronic exhaustion. He says, no, not there, please. That's where I'm going to put my head. So I feel very tired. People are, it is actually exhausting to do all this multitasking from home, to try to be educating your kids and all the other things. And trauma, dealing in a traumatic moment like this is also exhausting. We can just run through these a little faster, probably. Dissociative moments or feeling of dread. Here's a community activist saying, I can see the people trying to get across that bridge just like I can see you. I close my eyes and can see them. So that kind of intrusive, dissociative moments where thoughts or memories intrude on your day. A sense of persecution. So it's always, the dog says, it's always sit, stay, heal, never think, innovate, be yourself. I love that so much.
Me too.
Guilt. I feel guilty because I can leave at the end of the day. People can feel guilty because, other people on their staff are taking different kinds of risks right now. You can feel guilty because you still have a job or a paycheck and somebody you know or care about doesn't, or because you can't go to the restaurant that, the family restaurant you go to a lot, or whatever those things are, because you feel like your house should be cleaner if you're staying in it, or all of those things. What I remind myself is that guilt is a terrible replacement for solidarity. Guilt is not solidarity. It's a waste of time. I mean, it's just a fact. So, don't beat yourself up over it, but it's guilt is not solidarity. If we want to show up for people, then we can think of what's in my individual control,
right,
and what's in my collective control, to be in solidarity with people who don't have whatever this thing is that I'm feeling guilty about.
Right.
But just looking like crap, or not taking care of myself, or not eating right because somebody else has something worse or different is, it's just that's not solidarity.
Right. So. And Connie, I probably already said this in our conversation, but I guess I could just repeat it. But what I'm hearing from folks is this pressure from supervisors, directors, managers, that they're feeling like they have to have all these answers to everything. People are turning to them, advocates are turning to them, other staff are turning to them, waiting for this person who holds this leadership role to have these miracle answers for things that we don't have the answers to. We're flying by the seat of our pants, even though we're in a leadership position. And just because you have this wonderful title doesn't mean that you're going to have all the answers to everything. And I think sometimes we feel guilty because we think we should, right? We think we should be leading the mass in a direction that's going to be safe and sound and save everyone. But in reality, it's not going to happen that way. So I think it's best to, I always say it's real important to share with people transparency. And it's okay to say to your staff, like, you know what? I'm working this out just like you, and let's try to do this together.
Yeah.
I actually don't have all the answers, and I'm doing the best that I can. And just being honest about what areas you are struggling in also as a supervisor or a manager or a director is really important for staff to see that we're all in this together. Not
Yeah.
one person has all the answers and is going to save us all.
Yeah. And I think especially for people who were socialized as girls, who are women, you know, that so much of what we were taught was our worth, was how we were able to meet the needs of other people. And you know, we've often developed a lot of skills in the situation we have to be able to do that. And you throw all that out the window and you still have to meet people's needs. It can really mess with people's own identity, of their own self-identity of competent person, that my worth is when I can meet other people's needs. So, you know, that's hitting some deep stuff in so many folks. And then also there's higher level things, just like temperament. There are people who temperamentally are more comfortable in an extemporaneous experimental mode, and people who are very linear and concrete and step A, B, C, D. And that those different temperaments have different places where they shine in our work.
Right.
And so you might have the people who are very used to kind of that random innovation, that feel very comfortable and they don't understand what's the problem, you know?
Right.
And people who are used to very linear pieces, which allow us to get our paperwork done and to understand how to take those innovations and make them into something systematic that can be replicated, they might be really in a panic right now. So
Right.
it's, yeah.
So let me just read something that Tracy Kelly wrote. She said, I'm having a hard time hearing, we'll just have to get better and get creative. Like there's some capacity that I've been holding back on for emergencies, which totally makes sense, right? Like people keep saying, you know, you just got to get creative. And it's not like we haven't.
Right.
We're trying to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is we've been creative. I mean, we've been taking $1 and making $100 out of it for 40 years, you know? And Judy is repeating back to me one of my statements there of doing less with less. I've said for years, like in meetings, like people will say, you know, if we give you less, what will you do? And I'm like, we will do less. We will do less with less. We will not do more with less. And doing less with less is ethical, you know? But I do think that there are communities. I mean, this is a time when I know that Wiskitive's already talking to us about that, but we really do have to lean into all of those things we know about folks getting support from friends and family, and, you know, leaning into our communities about how folks can support survivors that we've always known as advocates, that we can't build out the whole reality around a survivor to keep, you know, of all the things a survivor needs. When we look at that full frame, there's all these elements that are outside of where our efforts lie. And that, you know, one thing that is interesting is seeing how those things are being mobilized. I'm seeing all kinds of friends putting on, that are not related to the movement, putting on their Facebook, you know, if you're in a bad way, ask me about my cookie recipe. If you need me to, you know, do something immediately, say you want the chocolate icing recipe, you know, whatever. So people are like, we don't have to have it all ourselves. We always say we wouldn't be able to solve it all ourselves. We always said that this is a movement that's going to take the whole world. Well, now we get to put up or shut up about that, right?
Right.
Some inability to sympathize or numbing, where it can just feel saturated, where there's just no more room to care about anything. We can keep moving.
Right. I really like this slide because it just makes me think about, like, you know, when you go back into things, you're kind of like this, and, you know, like no one can see you, but everybody can actually see you, right? And, you know, how do you live in that moment where you're trying to hide and be quiet, just to have that time to think and to process when
it's something that the rural folks that work in rural contexts know all the time. I mean, when I worked in Kansas in this little town, you couldn't go anywhere where people didn't know what you did. I remember one day I was just, you know, I was young and I was having a bad day, and I was like crying in my car because, you know, it's just like I lived in a house with other people. You didn't have any place private. So I was driving along and I was crying, and I turned And it was the woman that ran the United Way that did like the fund stuff, was sitting next to me in the car. And I'm like, I'm not crying. I'm not, you know, it's like, so there are folks who have had the experience of, you know, being, so we can learn from each other. Like, okay, so what do you do when you're always on?
Right, right.
Addictions. Says, boy, I'm going to pay for this tomorrow at yoga class. You know, that's something we have to think about in terms of our own, you know, our own capacities and the capacities of our coworkers. I know that a lot of meetings have been canceled all over Seattle, and there's, you know, meetings that are trying to go onto online. I'm talking about AA or MA meetings, and they're difficult to do because, you know, of an anonymity. So, any rate, but yeah, one way that people numb out or just try to tolerate is through, you know, using whatever that is, whether that's zoning out on TV shows or getting drunk or whatever. So to me, a big, I mean, there's many traditions around, you know, how to handle addictions or use, but again, being able to tolerate internally the sensations that we have is a big part of that. Stepping away from numbing out. Grandiosity. Must you precede everything you say with "this is your captain speaking"? So that is a real grandiosity, that sense that we're the only ones that can do it. We're the only ones that can do it right. That can really come to the fore. And part of that too is a lack of capacity to tolerate mistakes. So we are going to be confronted with the limits of our knowledge and capacity right now. And that really pushes up against that grandiosity, that idea that I can do it best, I can do it right. Yeah, of course you can do it best. You've been doing it longer. You made up the rules. You know, like, of course you know what it is. You are the like Benjamin Franklin of it. You wrote it, you know. But that, like right now we want a deep bench. This is the time to really be calling on all of the skills that people have. And that also means tolerating different ways of doing it, different metrics on what's the important part. What's the important part to me? The most important thing, which seems self-evident and obvious and written on tablets of stone and that everyone should know it, turns out it is subjective. Did you know that, Deirdre? It turns out those things are not written in the annals of all time as well known for, you know. So delegating, transparency come to mind too. It takes more effort and attention to connect and share with staff, et cetera, right? So we have to be able to be transparent about our process, to be transparent about our mistakes, to delegate, as Paul Clark is saying, and to then tolerate the pros and cons that come from that delegation. That when we want to delegate and then control all the things that happen, that's not delegation, that's trying to use people as automatons. And it's going to be, you know, maybe we could get away with that a little bit in the office, but it's going to be much harder to do that in this far-flung kind of confederated way that people are operating.
Totally. I agree with you. So we can get folks to put in the chat box, what is your COVID-19 challenge today? And some of the things that I've seen in the chat box are really focused around technology now that you're not in the office. Getting it running, it's slow, it's not working, how much energy you're putting into tech support, and getting tech support can be challenging. Someone wrote, having a meeting once a week with all staff over the phone or chat is really helpful. It feels supportive. So what is your challenge? What is your COVID-19 challenge today? I'll say that mine is, I keep assuming that this is going to end, right? Like, you know, in 3 days, in 4 days, in 10 days, I keep looking for the end, and it's not, I feel like it's playing a trick in my head. And so it's hard to live in that nebulous zone of when things are going to change.
Yeah. I mean, you can even see it in these slides. So, I mean,
right.
Everything is temporary depending on what scale of time you're thinking about, right? So
right.
That's just a thing you learn about the world if you get to stay around long enough.
Right.
But there are things that are more or less temporary than others. And there are things that are, and so when we were creating these slides, we started creating these slides a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And the temporary part was more, we were, at that moment, we were trying to remind ourselves that this wouldn't be forever, right? That this distress that we were feeling and the disorientation, the sense of the acuteness, that was temporary, as all things are. But now, as people are mentioning, the event horizon of this is starting to look longer and longer. And, the strategy of social distancing looks like it may be in place for a longer period of time. So
Right.
yes, in the arc of history, this will be temporary. And it doesn't mean we will return to what it was before. I think people are seeing that, that's not, you can't cross the same stream twice, kind of situation. So what's there to return to? But this event horizon is looking longer. And,
Right.
We have Washington State schools closed for the year, and so that is like a different stance, a sprint versus a marathon. There's a different stance. Now, I neither sprint nor run marathons, as you well know, but you could think of it in terms of binge television watching. You're going to watch a show for 10 minutes versus you're going to watch the entire arc of the series from the first one to the final season. That's you need different internal resources, got to have a different mindset. So, and then I understand some people run for short distances and then they run for long distances. That's another metaphor we could use. But so, we are looking at a much longer event horizon at this point. And so that is going to require different questions. And I think different opportunities from us to come together and strategize and to think about, how are people going to get the chance to bounce ideas off of each other and to learn from each other. People are saying, supporting staff that are putting their own lives at serious risk to support survivors, the cabin fever that people are just, climbing the walls at shelter. They're there without their familiar things. They're getting irritated by somebody they didn't choose to live with that now is their roommate forever. So, and just this piece of balancing, keeping the shelter up and running while minimizing risk to advocates. And this is just such a, I'm thinking about the shelter program so much. And I'm so appreciative of the work that our field has done over the past few years to raise salaries for people so that, advocates are not the advocates are working with a working wage. I think our moral grounding to be able to continue to ask people to take these risks would be much harder. The toll on us would be much harder if we hadn't taken some of those steps to improve people's pay and people's benefits and get people health insurance and things like that. So I just am appreciative of all the efforts that OCPA and WISCADIV and all the coalitions, King County, and all the programs did to do that work to get people better wages. And we're learning all the time, about how, we've never had PPE in our, personal protective equipment is not a term that we use in our work in the shelter programs. We learn not to reach into people's bags because there could be sharps in there. That was our sophistication of being, streetwise or whatever. But we don't have unions that are doing that work for our team. We are the folks who are looking out for them. And so when we take on that kind of responsibility, my niece, my precious niece who lives here in town, she's a nurse at Harborview, and believe me, their union is working hard to ensure that they have the kind of a protective equipment and things that they need. We don't have that structure in our anti-violence movement. And so we have to be stepping forward and thinking through what are the kinds of strategies and things that folks need. So, and just tools, that whole tactical logistical piece. So avoiding toxic worry. This is, we were just actually talking about number 5, doing the right thing, but this is just a little tool that I have used for myself, talk with survivors forever, talk with my coworkers for so long about it. But what are the steps to avoiding toxic worry and that kind of perseveration where you're just spinning, without producing something useful for yourself and worrying? What I sometimes call recreational worry. Um, and and that kind of, when worry is not productive and it starts to eat away at us, it can actually be very detrimental to our just our whole health and our capacity to function. And so this idea of this little 5 steps is I'm just moving, the chat is in the way of this thing, so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not letting me do it. Okay, I will not move the chat. It will just cover up my screen. So first is you just never worry alone. You have to draw on those networks of colleagues and, you know, all the folks those relationships you built over your career, all that networking that you've done with the coalition, that this is a time to reach out and to really think about who can I be as frank and honest, as unpretentious, as unguarded, to be saying like, here's what I'm dealing with, here's what it looks like, here's the questions I have. That sharing a worry can help ground you in the present moment, in what the real concerns are, and help you just move the worries through, move those things through. Getting information, prioritizing finding complete and accurate information, not using crap information off your social media feed, with all due respect to your social media feed. Not every report from a friend, from a cousin, from a boyfriend, from a whatever who used to work in a thing, you know, and that worrying with incomplete information is just a recipe for perseveration and not making progress. You don't worry alone. You get good information, then you make your plan. And when you feel overwhelmed, you get oriented on that plan and you just focus on the next step, right? So this is, again, we're not looking at long strategic pieces about changing the orientation of our work or the goals of our work. We're really looking at tactical moments. And it's like, what's the next part of this plan? And if it's something's too big, you break it down into smaller steps. Practice brain maintenance. That's committing to interrupting the habits of toxic worry. If you're spinning in a worry, you got to interrupt it. Sing a song, whistle a tune, get up and make yourself a pot of tea, do some jumping jacks. Keep hydrated and well rested, eat a meal for God's sakes, because if your body's screaming, I need to sleep, or I need some water, or I need to go to the bathroom, it's hard to discern that, you know, to parse out that cry from your, you know, human body for you to pay some attention to it from a information that your scan is having from that hypervigilance of like, there's something to attend to in the environment here, right? And then this one of do the right thing is avoid making choices now that will lead to worry later. So loving kindness now, taking a breath, making, you know, all you can do is the best you can do. And you want to do the best you can do because you can know you did the best you could do. And so when you look back, you can say, you know what, I can't worry about that. I can't pass trip. I did the best I could do. And that's one reason why I'm just so thankful that people did the work to like look at people's pay and look at benefits and things, because that was hard work to do, but that was doing the right thing. So now we're encountering this moment in better footing than we would have been if we hadn't done that work as a state. And then let's see.
Harder is harder.
Harder is harder. And then Kara's talking about being sick.
Well, I think what Kira's talking about is that she actually got sick and had to stay at home, and she wasn't able to lead her staff. She wasn't being the example she wanted to be and set because she was at home sick. It was really weighing on her, and she felt a lot of guilt from that. And I think that's the thing, like, you got to pack that guilt away, move that guilt over to the side, because that can really, you know, eat you up. And we have to, even though we're going to feel the guilt, we have to know, like, we're all doing the best we can during these weird times. Like we're really struggling through and we're pushing through. And I think one of the things you brought up in your bullet points was like, don't do it alone. Talk to other people, meet with other people, put your brains together so that you can figure things out. I mean, us at Whiskey, we're calling each other, FaceTime each other, chatting each other. We cannot do it alone. We're working together to figure out how to solve the next thing that comes in front of us.
And this is a time when our values and our beliefs are really going to be put to the test of, what is my belief about a person taking care of themselves when they're sick? What do I really believe they should do? Do I believe they should just keep working when they have COVID, or do I think they should get well? And so I get it. It's a consequence of trauma. I mean, we don't choose it. We don't so you can't just, I'm not asking you just to gut yourself out of it. But reaching out.
Yeah.
And then I think that's the other piece is we really have to be willing to apply what we would tell our friend to ourselves.
Exactly.
And the thing is it is right before I got on the call this morning with Dee, I opened my email and I have an invitation to a Shiva minion. So Shiva is a gathering that Jews do to when somebody dies, and you do that in person, and you do it for 7 days. That's what Shiva is. And my friend's mom died on Saturday, and so I just got this invitation to a Shiva minion online, a Zoom Shiva minion, and so. And I just I got that thing. I'm like, crap, this is the, first of that I'm going to have experienced. And then I just called up Dee and got on the phone. I didn't mention it, And so that's the thing is what do I think you should do when you get that message? And then you just start clocking in, and we're going to do different things. We're going to put it aside and move through. We're going to share it, but yeah. And just that piece of harder is harder. And that's in every way. This is something we used to say all the time at the shelter. I say it all the time. We think if things were harder, it would be easier to know what to do. If the violence was worse, I would know I should leave. If this job was crappier, I would know I should get a different job.
Right.
We just think if it's harder, it would be clearer what I should do. But harder is harder. It's always harder. So reach out now. Don't wait until it's harder.
Right. And oftentimes we see ourselves as folks who are in the field dealing with crisis on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean we actually have all the answers to every crisis, right? We just don't. And so, and it's okay.
Right. And the thing too is when we're doing anti-violence work, we are not in crisis. We're supporting people in crisis, but we are not in crisis. We know what to do. We have our tools. We have our strategies. We're not just doing anti-violence work right now. We're in a setting in the world where there is a crisis happening all around us, and we may be situated in some different way to that, but we are part of a large social crisis moment. And so it is those strategies we have to be clear, I'm not in crisis, I'm a crisis support thing. Well, that's a little different because we kind of are in crisis. It just may be around about something different. So having compassion for themselves for that.
Right. I mean, we're all in crisis, right? I'm not someplace different on a beach with my toes in the sand going, hey, y'all work that out. No, we're all in this together, and we're all trying to work through it together. And we can do this. We can do it as long as we continue to work together. I mean, who's our Dr. Fauci? Do we have a Dr. Fauci on Whiskey? We don't have a Dr. Fauci.
So this little thing I made on this pledge, a few days into the, when I just saw I'm the least competent, laziest person among all my friends. And they were all starting new plays and mounting, they're doing their, and so I was just I'm gonna make a pledge that I am going to do it will be okay if I produce nothing spectacular during this time. If my drawers are as messy, I mean, I'm like, I'm going to pick up 10 things out of my bedroom every day, and I haven't even done that. So, you know, the part to me is like how to behave with loving kindness towards people around me, to not have conflict in my home, to have grace with myself and other people about how this moment is moving with them, and to just know that I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to lose it, and that there's no hiding it. You know, there's no faking it. You're just going to have to breathe and try to, Hesed means loving kindness. So, you know, just be loving kind, the next piece. So,
yeah. And people want that slide. So we're going to try to make sure we can get that to folks. So we only got about 5 minutes left, Connie, and we only got a couple slides left. So we're doing good.
Doing good. So we're gonna also send out some just resources of, you know, I think people have seen the NNEDV resources on the tech and the confidentiality stuff. VAWA has some guidance on the kinds of, you know, just really encouraging people to keep staff employed and to have them, you know, they can do trainings, they can do all kinds of different work, you know, to keep working during this time. My organization has a COVID-19 resource piece that we're using with our congregants that has just different resources. I think people have seen the stuff about applying for the PPL, but just if anybody wants to put into the chat any kind of resources that you're finding that help you, it could be, you know, inspiration, but also just like, I found this great tool that is helping me figure out how to organize my sick leave in this moment, or whatever that is. So
yes, Mama says
lower your standards. Okay, here's the funny thing about this. I made this for my friends, and you know, this was the message I wanted to give. Mama says lower your standards. But I actually made this picture like 3 times because I wanted the ribbon to look like it was folded. So I kept on improving my stupid lower your standards sign. So sometimes it's easier said than done to take your own, but I just have to remember, don't undermine your coping strategies, just lay another one on. If you have to make your lower your standards sign 27 times, you just have to do you.
Right. I think it's so true. I love that statement, lower your standards. We're not here for perfection. We're here for connection.
These are just some little, I don't know, just little things I've been making for my cruise, but I was doing these like postcards from your prefrontal cortex, just recognizing that our complex thinking is a little hard to get to right now. And so, you know, the reactions we might be having, reactions when we see people standing next to each other or whatever. So these are just some silly postcards from your prefrontal cortex. And I put a couple on here, but also it's just whatever that complex thinking is that sometimes we have to like calm down to be able to find that information for ourselves. So this is just saying like families look different.
So you guys have already been putting lots of stuff in the chat. If there's anything else you want to add in there about the biggest surprise so far, you know, what's working well, we already asked that question, but feel free to put that in there. Here's Connie's quick reminder.
Saying that buying things gives you a little sense of control, but more boomsticks, which is makeup or whatever, is actually not going to give you control in this moment. So
right.
I found myself just like buying stuff. I was like, what's going on with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all trying to figure it out in our own way. And it's important for us to connect with others for check and balance. And it's so interesting because I got in the car yesterday to drive with my son, and we passed by an Olive Garden, you know, and you would assume Olive Garden would be closed, but they figured out a way to take orders. And what they did is they took all their the dining room chairs in their restaurant, and they lined them up in this huge parking lot. and put numbers on every chair. So when you place your order, you drive up to the dining room chair and they bring it to your car. And they made it work, right? So it's just really interesting that we're all trying to figure it out in a gabillion ways, right? There's no one solution. And together, I think that's our goal, is to do it together. Keep meeting, keep talking, keep logging onto webinars, reading information, keep the connection, because I think that's what's going to help us get through this, is talking to one another, sharing our information, supporting one another, staying connected, I think is really important.
And I just appreciate the work that you're all doing. And I know survivors' lives are better right now because of the work you're doing to continue to reach out. And that, you know, that matters to me. And I know it matters to so many people who are surviving right now, or survivors in other times of their lives. And so thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to comment that someone wrote, the biggest surprise is how much we all miss each other. And I think that's so true. You don't really think about how much you're going to miss your coworkers, but we do. We miss our coworkers. We miss our people. And that's who we're with a large part of our day. And so we miss those folks. And Judy says, fundamentally, survivors advocacy is about listening, validating survivors, and helping them navigate to solve problems together. We've got that. So thanks, Judy. I think, you know, this was a great opportunity for us to come together and just have some great conversation. I appreciate everyone that has joined us today. I'll try to get Connie to come back and do another part 2 maybe, and we can have another webinar soon. So that would be great. We really appreciate you all joining us today and being with us. Make sure you fill out your evaluation. Thank you so much to our interpreters, Annie and Teresa. And any last words, Connie?
No, just thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Yes, thank you. I found this really cute picture of a woman sunbathing in her home with a fake sunshine, some plants, with her dog, sipping on a smoothie. I thought it was cute. So, you know, make your home what you want it to be. Make your space, turn it into whatever you want it to be so that you can function and be happy. It's important. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Connie. And thank you, Mackenzie.
Bye, everyone.